Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the organizing committee that has invited me to deliver a speech here on the sustainable low carbon development. So I might not talk more about the Indonesian, but I just talk a bit general about the sustainable low carbon development and the importance of having regional network for enhancing the capacity of us in developing countries. And I think, as we all know, that our climate is really changing, which is faster than what we expected before, and now make global communities a bit nervous that we need to have a deeper cut of our emission. And it is not surprising that everyone agreed at COP13 to have a long-term collaborative action, how we can enhance the national and international action to mitigate the climate change. And of course, in the context of developed countries, they also need to continue the commitment, how they can reduce their emission a bit more than what they did during the Kyoto Protocol. But of course, we know that they are still under negotiation about this. But for the developing country, we also being requested to play an active role in reducing our emissions. So it's not only just a passive, but how we can also, on voluntary basis, to play an active role to reduce our emission. And now it is being called as the National Appropriate Mitigation Action. We call it NAMA. But of course, still in the context of sustainable development, with the support of financial and also the capacity building. But of course, in this case, we need also to develop how we can measure the achievement that we have made so far, and how we can report the achievement that we have made in transparent manner, and also how we can also verify that what we have achieved is real and measurable. Now, of course, there are another decision agreed that also there is a support also for developing countries, and these developed countries, how they can also reduce the emission from deforestation and degradation, which is known as REDD+. And this, if we illustrate about the National Appropriate Mitigation Action, and that, as I said before, that for the developing country, we also need to play an active role how it can reduce our emission. And there are two actions that we can do. What we call it the unilateral NAMA, where we can do in our self-financing how we can reduce the emission. But if you want to reduce further, and then we can go through a supported NAMA. Of course, the emission reduction achieved through these actions is not tradable, but it is really a contribution of developing nation to the climate mitigation. And of course, if we go further, and then we also can participate through a carbon trading, where we already know about that. But NAMA is also important decision made by the parties, how we together can achieve the emission reduction target at the global level to a level of 50% below 1990. So if we fail to meet this target, and I think as the IPCC report in the fourth assessment report, that the impact of climate change might be difficult to be handled. And of course, the impact will be more serious than what we thought before. And then how the emission path should be. And then if we look at these figures, and developed nation actually, they are start to reduce their emission following this path. Then under the Kyoto Protocol, they already did commit to reduce their emission by 5% in the first commitment period in 2008 to 2012. But in 2020, they also need to reduce further into 20 to 30%, and by 2050 goes to 70 and 80%. And of course, we as a developing nation, we are still growing, we are still developing, and it's not easy to reduce our emission. And then in this context, under the long-term cooperative action, I think the developing countries should avoid the mistakes being made by developed countries. If not, and if we continue the way we develop, as has been done by developing countries in the past, and then of course we'll follow the same path. So the emission will be like that. So developed countries already done the development, and the emission will, if we look at from here, they go in this direction. And then developing country will also follow a similar pattern if we also develop as what the developed country did in the past. So in this context, how developing country can continue their development with a lower emission? So we avoid this one, but developing countries should continue their development with a lower carbon emission. But of course, it's not easy to do. To achieve this path, of course, there is a need to accelerate the transfer of technology. Without that one, I think it will be difficult. But we also know that the issue of transfer technology is also not easy, and it's not also free of transferring a new technology to developing countries. Become also hot debate and negotiation how these issues can be handled. But of course, the second one, if we want to do this one, also there is need an additional investment. And the most important one also, how we can strengthen our capacity to do that. And of course, we need to create more pilot action on the ground, because as you know that the source of emission from developing countries is more on the land use change and forestry, and how I also can create a lot of good action on the ground that everyone can learn. And the other thing that we know that the urban or the city in developing countries also contribute a lot to the emission, and I think effort to reduce emission from the urban areas also is very important. And this is just to show you that how actually the share of emission among developed countries, developing countries, and least developed countries. If we look at here in developed countries, most of the source of the emissions come from the energy, but the source of emission from the LULUCF or land use change and forestry is very small. If we move into developing countries, and then we can see here that the contribution of land use change and forestry is still very high. And then we go into least developed countries, and the dominant source of the emission is on land use change and forestry. But as the countries develop, and the share of the emission from the energy sources will growing. We know that as we develop, and our wealth here, our riches is going up, and of course the demand for energy also continue to increase. But from the data of all OECD countries, non-OECD countries, it's quite clear that the increase of wealth and the human development index is not necessarily always increasing the energy demand. And we can see here there are some countries where they already reached human development index close to 1, but the energy demand is still very low here. And what does that mean? There are a good lesson that we can learn from countries where they can continue to develop and reach a human development index of 1, or they become rich country, but the use of energy is still very efficient. The demand of energy per capita can be kept at a lower level. And I think these are the important how we can learn and develop a network that where we can learn each other how we can do or continue our development with lower level of emission. And we know that if we go back into developing countries, the most of source emission from the urban and the cities come from the energy sources, while in the rural area, mostly come from the land use-based emission. So here, so we can see here again, just to repeat the figures that I showed before, that in the urban area, main source of emissions come from normally from the cities, which is characterized with a high demand of energy, while in the rural areas, it's mostly come from the land-based emission. And these are the conditions show that the most of the population density is very high in the city, and then based on the analysis, it is also quite clear that the 75% of the world energy demand come from the urban area. So that we know that the major source of the emission from the urban and the city is come from the transportation and also the use of energy. And if we look at the driver of greenhouse gas emission, it's very simple equation but have very big meaning here. The CO2 emission is a function of population and then growth, the GDP per population and energy per GDP, and also CO2 per energy use. And these equations represent the energy efficiency, while here the clean energy and technology. This is what I mean, that probably we need to focus in the urban and the city areas how we can reduce the emissions through energy efficiency and the use of the clean energy and technology. In the rural areas, we know that the source of emissions come from the land-based emission, and this one is from the sequestration. But in many cases in the developing countries, the land-based of emission is much higher compared to the sequestration. So that's why in the long-term cooperative action, one of the decisions called 13, that the REDD is become of the hot issues where the developing country can contribute significantly in reducing their emission from the rural areas. So, through the studies, through the low carbon network researcher, where we meet every year, actually there are some research work that has been done by us, by Cambodia, by Thailand, by Korea, by China, and also by Malaysia, and also Indonesia. Through modeling work, we also can come up with the result, what actually the strategy that can be done to achieve low carbon development. So in this context, in the context of Indonesia, there are a number of interventions that we can do to reduce the emission, especially from the urban area, through the use of clean energy, through the residential and commercial areas and low carbon style, through also residential and commercial, and low carbon electricity, low carbon energy system in industry, and sustainable transport. So the modeling work actually these are the list of the intervention that we do from each action. And these are the target of the government of Indonesia, what are actually the vision in 2050. So we set up a vision where we expect the GDP growth rate under the BAU will be 6.9, and under CM1 is also the same, but under CM2 we can go up into 8.3. And then also the energy demand is being projected following this. But through the work that our team are doing, so we can see that even though our GDP growth is set up very high, but we still can reach the GDP with a level of with lower emission. And this kind of work done by the scientists should also be reached to the policymakers, how this information can be passed in an effective way where it can assist the policymaker in designing strategies toward low carbon development. And we know that there are a number of scientific work on low carbon development strategies already in the region, which can assist the policymaker in developing strategies toward low carbon development. But however, they have not been used effectively. And some of the researchers are very enjoy in doing the research, but actually the good outcome from the research not really is used by the policymakers effectively. And then we go back into the rural areas. Then again, there are a number of interventions that can also be done, how actually the land-based emission can be reduced, and also the sequestration level can be increased, such as by improving land productivity to reduce the demand for agricultural land, and create more alternative economic income for the rural community, and how we also can optimize the use of organic waste for fertilizer and energy, and optimizing the use of other renewable energy sources, and also optimizing the use of unproductive land for agriculture and timber production. And this actually connected very well with the REDD issues in REDD Plus. And then, in doing REDD, it's not an easy program. It is very complex because it is related to the spatial plan. And for the local government, it is very important that the change of the land use strategy might also have a serious impact on the economic development. So in doing this kind of analysis, and I think you have to work it very carefully, how actually the national land-based low carbon development policy strategy will have an implication on the micro and macroeconomic of national and regional local level. So this kind of analysis can help and give ideas to policymakers what the implication of selecting or using a certain land use strategy on their economic development. And of course, for the local government, it is also very important how they can translate that into a local mitigation program, and how actually the actors which contribute to the emission can also build a consensus together that they can achieve the emission without harming their objective of their development. Of course, in the context of the business people, they might easily adopt this kind of intervention if this actually also assists their business activities. And of course, the most important, we also need to do an analysis what actually the implication of doing an intervention on the land use policy for the local government and also on regulation. And of course, all these actors need to be supported by the national government, how actually the local government can be encouraged to go into low carbon development by creating incentive system for them. So, for example, for fiscal policy and incentive. And this kind of work and this kind of scientific work need to be done in a participative way with the local government. And so this can develop also their understanding. In developing the spatial plan, it's very important for them also to consider the environmental strategic issues, because by doing that, actually, they will ensure that the development that they are doing will be sustainable. And this kind of work also has been done in Indonesia, and I'm sure that it also been done in other countries in the region. This gives you an illustration what kind of intervention that can be done, what level of difficulties and the barriers that might be faced in introducing the intervention to the local government. So this one is about one of the cases that we did in the central Kalimantan. And here is in terms of cost, how much certain intervention will cost us, and what are the level of difficulties in implementing the option. This one is really achievable. It is no regret option, as we call it. And then there are some challenges if we want to go into this action, but of course by going into this action, we can reduce the emission a bit higher. And if we go into here, it's more difficult, but of course the cost of doing that was very high, and not only in terms of cost, but also other barriers related to policy and regulatory barriers. And this gives an illustration to the government, to the policymakers, and ideas what actually the intervention that can be done, what are the level of difficulties in doing the intervention, and what are the policies that should be in place in order to remove some of the barriers and implication of cost and also of the development. And I think there are some good lessons learned also available on that, where we can share together. So I would like to end my presentation here that there are many modeling work that can help the policymakers in developing strategy for low carbon development. And there's a need actually for us how we can integrate the work of from the research community for the policymakers. And I think it is very crucial how the good research work that has been done by scientific community can be passed into the policymaker and use it for setting up a low carbon development strategy. which not harm the economic development. And of course, there are also a number of lessons learned from other countries in the region in implementing land-based activity with lower emission. And of course, we also can share learning from that pilot. And so, I think I consider that it's very important for us actually to set up a regional network where we can enhance the transfer of knowledge and technology among countries about low carbon development, and also exchange the lesson learned in integrating research and policy. And I fully support actually the idea of developing this low carbon society regional network, as it is part of the capacity development. It not actually we don't like to call it capacity development, but among the region I think we have strength and weakness. But the most important is through the network that we are going to develop, how we can share the strength that we have and learn each other to develop our countries in a sustainable way. And I think, thank you very much, and I hope it is quite useful for us to refresh our memory that there are things that we can learn together, and having a network, regional network, is very important to strengthen our collaboration. Thank you very much.